After so long, Wolong is finally back with all 3 of its DLCs out, and as promised, I'm gonna rank the new bosses found within them. Some of the side mission bosses will be excluded, well, most of them, with the exception of those I actually have things to say about. As usual, I'm using tiers from awful to amazing, and all that usual crap. So let's begin. General of Heaven's Illusion is a nice refight, and a terrible gank. And unfortunately the devs decided to focus more on the terrible gank aspect. Besides the repetitive staff spam combo, I like the new moves, especially the lightning balls that you can jump over. So I don't understand why they thought it would be a good idea to have the summoning mechanic be the central focus of the entire fight. Best case scenario, you destroy the summoning parchments before the summons go through, and it just becomes a needless distraction that doesn't add anything to the fight. And worst case scenario, you have 2 enemies that love jumping sky high and a 3rd that can teleport, fighting you all at the same time. So keeping all 3 on screen at once is not going to be consistently even possible. However, if you do have the DPS to prevent at least 1 of 2 summons, you can just run around until the summon vanishes. And I'm not sure if this is really the case, but I feel they've nerfed the amount of time the summons are active. If that's the case, good. Next update, just remove the entire mechanic. Thank you. But the real big problem here is that there's only 3 new main bosses per DLC, and this is one of them. And it's not even a new fight, or an improvement on the original. So what was even the point? Just budget reasons? A fuck you to everyone? Or just to throw a bone to Cytonux because they ranked General of Heaven as the best boss in Wolong? That must be it. Zhuyan kinda feels more like a dirty trick rather than a clever remixed fight. The original boss was very straightforward and slow, whereas this has attacks so quick I often get hit before I even realize there's an attack coming. You kinda have to rewire your brain after getting the original moveset down to muscle memory. And that really fucks me up. I also think the animations look a bit janky, and the arena could have been a lot bigger for a boss this size that's running around everywhere. Still, can't deny they did make it a lot more complex than the OG, with more varied combo finishers, ranged attacks in the form of giant boulders, and even surprise consecutive spirit attacks. And with it being an optional side mission boss, it doesn't come at the expense of a main boss. Look, I can't do Chinese names, I'm just gonna call this boss Susan. Susan isn't a remixed boss, but rather one that ends up being recycled into a standard enemy later on, which does also make it lose some of its uniqueness. But compared to any other boss prior, it does feel like a refreshing change of the norm. Can't say Team Ninja has made too many plant woman bosses, and I like her design. While the poison status effect does suck to get, at least they did something different than just deflect spam. You have to actually watch your step. While I think her moveset is pretty good, albeit a bit standard outside the poison, I didn't have to see much of it because damn does this boss melt! Even more so if you use fire. It ended up feeling more like a mini-boss and not the 3rd last boss in the entire game. At least her timings are strange enough to give you some challenge if she manages to fight back. Our third DLC boss in a row is the 3rd and last boss of not only this DLC, but the entire game. And with that in mind, I can't help but feel a little disappointed. Yuan Shu's base moveset is pretty good. His sword strikes can either be a long rhythmic back and forth combo, or end on a quick or delayed slam. You'll have to be quick to react to the change in combo, and that's good stuff. Unfortunately, I think the battle progressively gets more problematic the more mechanics they introduce. The majority of his first health bar is like a reimagined Otakemaru, a boss that uses all elements of the game and constantly switches between them. This brings RNG into the forefront because if you get fire, the boss will be evasive. If you get ice, the boss will be evasive and can one-shot you. But if you get lightning, he's lightning slow and lets you melt his health. But aside from that, they all kinda end up feeling the same. You're basically just deflecting different color cubes and a different color dash attack. I still thought it was pretty fun, and I had hopes, when I realized there's a second health bar, that they could do something interesting with it. Unfortunately, this is where the fight gets extremely tedious. He's constantly doing this fire spin move that sends him to the other side of the planet, where he'll throw 2 fire harpoons. The second one is really annoying to deflect because its timing is based on distance, so you kinda need to see it. But the first harpoon usually obscures it, and it has 2 different timed hitboxes, the harpoon itself and the fire explosion. And as if that time-consuming, distance-creating move wasn't enough, he also loves spamming icicle projectiles that force you to play passively. He has so much health for someone you're not allowed to touch for so much of the fight. As for redeeming qualities, I do like a few of his moves. It's hard and intense, and thematically sound for a final boss. Music is also one of Wolong's best, I think. I was always vocal about how I don't like Neo's soundtrack, so I want to give credit where credit is due. I like Wolong's soundtrack. So Yuan Shu is alright. Too much cubes and GTFO moves. Captive Swordsman, aka Danfu, aka Zhu Shu, aka Blindfolded Boy's cousin, is yet again a boss from the third DLC. Look, I'm not trying to shit all over Upheaval of Jingping. I thought it was at least alright. But I think this guy falls a bit short for being the second last boss and the last human fight in the main story. Considering the human before this was Taishi Ci, this was really easy in comparison. This is the point in the game where they should have put the true test of skill for fighting humans. Not just another pushover with no poise. But all that being said, I do really like his moveset and style of fighting. Not only does he make me think of Blindfolded Boy with those aerial projectiles and the ability to parry your attacks, but those conjured weapons make me think of Morgoth. And that's a good boss to be thinking of when fighting another boss. His fighting style is just very flashy, acrobatic and agile, and if you refrain from stun-locking him to death, it's very enjoyable. His balancing may not be great, but I think the sheer enjoyment factor boosts him to low good tier. But I think it was a missed opportunity to not give him a poise buff for at least the side mission refight, which is what they did for our next boss. Zhu Shu was even more of a pushover in the main mission than Zhu Shu, but fortunately the refight fixes this issue. So for this ranking specifically, I'm going to just ignore the main story version. It would be a low decent tier at best for how stupidly easy it is. Though I will never forget how dumb of a moment it was, story-wise, for him to think that Dian Wei was just a common bandit, given his over-the-top decorated armor.
You must be bandits as well.
Thanks. What's your name, warrior? I follow General Gongsun. My name is Zhao Yun.
You must be bandits as well.
Now is the time to show the tenacious courage of the Swens.
You must be bandits as well.
Men, the time has come to make Dong Zhuo pay for his tyranny.
You must be bandits as well. You must be bandits as well.
Now, you'd expect a giant hammer wielder to be slow and clunky, but that's not at all the case for this coked-out porkchop who won't stop moving. He's got one of the longest spam combos in the game, can dash out of reach in an instant, jump around and attack as fast as any lightweight fighter in the game. And you know what? It's very fun, with the exception of some of his unreliable punish windows. In particular, I think his super long combo should be more punishable. He should stay still after it's done for at least a second or two. Instead, he always rolls right out of there, leaving me holding my cock. Outside of that, it's a nice little adrenaline romp of a fight, and him toying with massive boulders and ground eruptions is fun. Ice Genichiro really fucked me up. He doesn't have crazy long combos, but he has almost no pauses in between his attacks, so they might as well be crazy long combos. You have to figure out which attacks are safe to punish and which aren't. He's also really good at tricking you into thinking he's doing something he's not. He can do a feint before an overhead slam, or a sudden dash to the side and then a thrust, and when he does a longer charge thrust it ends up actually being 2 strikes, not 1. And in the side mission he can do a different charge thrust that has a lasting hitbox thanks to a whirl of ice. But most deceptively of all, he makes you think he'll have a proper phase 2 when the soundtrack changes dramatically, when in reality all he does is summon a whale to splash some easily avoided water once, and then doesn't do it again. But I suppose the intensity does increase naturally, because the longer the fight goes on, the more surprised I am about still being alive, and the harder I'll try holding on to that. It's a fight I've come back to a lot because it's really satisfying learning all the tricky timings. He's not crazy complex outside of those animations, but I enjoy deflecting each and every attack. If there's one thing the DLC and Wolong in general has proven, it's that Team Ninja keeps getting better at making human fights. And one thing I've also learned to appreciate more thanks to Lies of P is the spirit attacks of Wolong. Basically, Lies of P has the same mechanic minus the little flash right before the attack lands, which is there to indicate when you should parry. This little detail and the lack of it makes and breaks the mechanic in Wolong and Lies of P respectively. And there's no better example of that than Gan Ning, who makes by far the best use of these attacks. In fact, they're the central focus of the entire fight. He has a good number of different spirit attacks, some very quick, some super delayed, some that he can chain together, and my favorite, the one where he uses the ship's mast to swing himself at you. Love it when bosses use the environment to their advantage. As for his moveset outside the spirit attacks, it's actually really tricky. And part of that reason is because I find it hard to see what he's doing. Not only are his weapons tiny, his fists, but the boss itself is the same size as the player. There's a reason why many human bosses in games are much bigger than the player. It's not for story purposes or something, it's just so you can see them better. He's got cool attack patterns, I just wish they were a bit more readable. That's why I'm actually fine with the main story version of this fight not having poise until phase 2, because he doesn't use spirit attacks as much in phase 1, which are far more readable than his basic attacks. You don't even really need to counter the basic attacks in phase 2, you can rely entirely on spirit attacks. So if you want that true challenge that's partially based on bad readability, you can do the side mission. Once you start to recognize what he's doing, it's great fun. While Team Ninja does keep improving their human fights, they've always had great demon designs. That's their bread and butter, and Dian Wei is particularly well baked. I always got the sense that they designed this boss backwards. It's like they first made these insane long combos but then realized there's no way people are gonna survive this shit, so they shortened those attacks in phase 1 to ease you into it. Obviously I'm just guessing, but I like that learning progression. I especially applaud them for their little detail of him doing his hand motion at the end of phase 1 combos, which won't do anything yet, but becomes a finishing move later on. It doesn't feel cheap, you've already seen the animation many times. So again, they're just easing you slowly into the real fight. Another thing I always enjoy is spinny attacks that require multiple deflects, and this boss has no shortage of those types of moves. At this point this fight feels quaint in comparison to the next big demon bosses they made, but if I'm ever in the mood to play tennis ball with a gorilla bird, I know where to look. Taishi Ci, who was already the bane of my existence as a human, comes back as a demon to wreak havoc once more. And fuck me! This boss has my vote for the hardest fight in the entire game. I don't know what it is about ice bosses, but this, his human version, Yuan Shu ice form, all mess me up despite my water-resistant armor. But speaking of Yuan Shu, I think that boss is a showcase of how a big moveset can feel so limited, whereas Taishi Ci shows how much you can do with so little. They milked this 4-hit combo as much as is humanly possible. He can repeat the combo twice or even thrice with no pause, turning it into a massive string of attacks. He can also do only the first couple of hits sometimes, or have the startup be super delayed. And then in phase 2 he can slow it down and have each hit be followed up by flying blades. So they really got their money's worth out of this single combo animation. The progression of this boss's moveset is similar to Dian Wei. They show you the moves early on, then by the end of the fight they've molded those combos into something far more demanding. And you know what? It works. It's also nice to see how they echo the human version's moves here, particularly with the bow. And with a keen eye you might notice that his hair or plume ends on a little whale tail shape. So great attention to detail, fun moveset, top-notch challenge. But if I were to complain about something, it would probably be this one chain of attacks, where he first dashes through you, throws ice projectiles, freezes the ground, shoots arrows, zooms through the arena, and calls down a rain of icicles. Awesome looking chain of abilities, but maybe a little over-scripted. But it did take me a while to even realize he's scripted to do them in that order every time, so probably won't matter to most. Truly a great tier fight, but as far as amazing tier goes, I think I'd only give it to one boss in this trio of DLCs. Guan Yu is Lu Bu too, so of course he's amazing, what did you expect? This time there's no horse and no bow, just a straightforward duel that has no story significance whatsoever. It's basically just a random side mission boss. That will definitely make a lot of people overlook this fight, but if you enjoyed Lu Bu, you have to try out Guan Yu. He's basically just an improved Lu Bu, gameplay-wise. He has even more varied attack strings and even more unpredictable combo mix-ups, and there's plenty of completely new moves that mesh perfectly into the existing moveset. My favorite attack in the entire game is Lu Bu's spin dance, and that has more of a presence in Guan Yu's fight. It's a potential follow-up to a lot more moves than it used to be, and it itself has potential follow-ups, such as a wide swing, quick poke, and a spirit attack. If you're someone like me who loves having varied combo mix-ups in your boss fights, this is heaven. This might be the single best one in that regard, in any game I've played. I lost count trying to figure out how many finishers his basic combo has. Now, in terms of presentation, he's admittedly not that impressive. I mean, I like having what sounds like a train honking at me while this crazy dude is spinning around, but it's obviously not as cool as Lu Bu. But just purely from a gameplay perspective, he's absolutely top tier. But is he my favorite in the game? Hard to say. maybe not. He does boil down to just being about deflect timing. The mix-ups keep it engaging for sure, but I always like when fights put pressure into your footwork too. Positioning really doesn't matter here. Either way, he's easily in my top 3. Him, Lu Bu, and Blindfolded Boy. Those are the 3 amazing tier fights in Wolong, as far as I'm concerned. So, some closing thoughts on the DLC and Wolong itself. First DLC was garbage. Second was pretty good. Third was pretty good. Wolong never jived with me quite the same way as Nioh 2 did, but Team Ninja's games just play so well that in short bursts they're always enjoyable. And the DLCs are short bursts, so I had fun. I don't love Wolong, but I do appreciate it. And look, I'm sorry for absolutely butchering the Chinese names. I genuinely mean no disrespect. I love Chinese culture, not their government as much. They have richer history than most, and I love Chinese food. You know, except for dog.